Sometimes when I'm working on a sermon, I worry that I won't have enough to say or I won't know quite what to say. And then there are times when I have so much to say that one story leads to another story, which leads to another story, which then becomes so overwhelming that it can't all be said in one sermon. And it's at times like that when I realize that I have to boil it down because you don't want to hear 8 pages of concepts about boundaries. And so being overwhelmed and even a little bit bored with my 8-page sermon this morning, I decided to take a break and go for a walk. And what I realized that I just need to get to the essence of what it is I want to talk about today under the title Loving Boundaries. And so I came up with 3 questions for us to ponder. Number 1, how do we figure out what we need? Number 2, how do we express what we need? Number 3, how do we get those needs met? How do we figure out and acknowledge what we need? How do we share and express that need to other people? And how do we get those needs met? And in the chaos of all of the stories that I was thinking about sharing today, I realized that is what it all boils down to. And that is what it has boiled down to for, well, throughout the ages, and even through the last few years and the last few weeks, and even this week for me. And it happens, we can ask these 3 questions on so many different levels. And that is what was happening to me today, because I'm like, do I talk about this from a personal level? Do I talk about this from a organizational level? Do I talk about this from the level of community and humanity? Like, what level are we talking about? And then what I realized is that it doesn't matter, because those 3 questions, how do we figure out what we need? How do we express what we need? And how do we get those needs met? Are happening over and over and over again on all levels. They happen on a very personal level, just as we, as each individual human being, has to figure out what our body needs, what we're going to eat and drink and do and move just within our bodies, and then how do we bring health within our own bodies. So we can ask those 3 questions on that level. But then we're in relationship with one another in our personal lives, within our family structure, or within our neighborhood, or with our best friends. So once again, we ask those questions in that smaller context of our individual lives. How do we figure out what we need? How do we express that to the people closest to us? And how do we get those needs met? But then it goes out a little bit larger into the concept of this little faith community. What is it that the members of this UUCGV, this little Unitarian Universalist Church in Grand Junction, Colorado, what do we as a little faith community need? What are our needs? How do we care for and reach out to one another? How do we ask for help from each other? How do we get those needs met? How do I, as a minister, reach out to the congregation and say, This is what I need. This is what I need help with. How do we fix this? How do you as congregants look at each other or look at me as your minister and say, this is what I need from you as your minister. This is what I need from the congregation. How do I ask for that? And then how might we meet it? And then we expand that a little bit more and from one organization to another. How do we as the Unitarian Church here in the Grand Valley interact with Grand Valley Peace and Justice and mutual aid partners and the Hispanic Affairs Project and CIRC and Koinonia and Black Citizens and Friends? So now we all have expanded a little bit, but what does Black Citizens and Friends need from the Unitarian Universalist congregation? And what does the Unitarian Universalist congregation need from Grand Valley Peace and Justice? And what does Grand Valley Peace and Justice need from Homeward Bound? And how do those circles begin to interact with each other? And as organizations, are we communicating with each other, and are we saying what we need? And it goes out and out and out, and then it becomes, okay, we're part of a state. So what does Grand Junction need in relationship to what Littleton needs, in relationship to what Pueblo needs, in relation to the whole state? And it just expands and expands and expands until we get into world systems, and then we get into planetary systems. And it is all the same, and yet it is not all the same because it's all on different levels. And so that's what I was thinking about today, and that's why I started to overwhelm myself, because do I stand up here and talk to you about what we need as individual human beings? Do I talk to you about what we need as a faith community? Do I talk to you about what we need as Americans? Like, how do we do that? And that's what I realized, is that I need to talk about these principles, and all of you will take what you need from it based on what's going on in your life. For some of you, it may be very individual right now. I just need to get from point A to point B. Some of you may be, I just need to have this relationship mended between myself and a loved one. Some of you may be thinking, no, we need to look at things more expanded, more globally. But it does come back to taking the time to figure out what it is we need and how to ask for that. And that is what I realize is the essence of what it means to have loving boundaries. We can't have boundaries, we can't have loving boundaries, we can't have healthy boundaries if we don't first know what it is we need, if we don't first know who we are, and if we don't first know what it is we stand for and where we stand. And so it is a practice that happens over and over again on so many different levels. And I want to share a few examples today of how we might do that on a few different levels. So I occasionally have, so we'll start on the most internal personal level, and I'll give you an example of some of what my patterns are and what goes on with me, and as I realize who I am, how I express what I need. I happen to be on, for those of you that are familiar with an Enneagram, I happen to be a 9. And a 9 on the Enneagram is kind of a spiritual personality test. The 9 on the Enneagram is the peacemaker. I'm the person that can kind of sit on the fence and I can see this side and I can see this side. And that's a beautiful skill. But it can also, our strengths can also be our weaknesses. And so then sometimes it comes across as a little bit wishy-washy. One of the things that a 9 on an Enneagram is pretty good at avoiding conflict. And so we talk about one of the spiritual principles in life and with grief and with learning is that life really is like a spiral. And we, in so many levels, go around and around. And every time we come around, it feels like we're coming back to the same place, but we're not always coming back to the same place because we're coming back around, but at a different level. And so we always see it a little bit differently. But one of the patterns, these spiraling patterns that I have learned, I have noticed in myself is that tendency to be a little bit conflict avoidant. And so a few years ago, there was a conversation that needed to be had with somebody in my life. And it was going to be a hard conversation. And I avoided it, and I avoided it, and I avoided it. And then when I finally was like, okay, I can address this now. And I reached out to that person was like, I needed to hear from you a long time ago. Not interested anymore. So you learn, right? It comes back around. It came back around about 6 weeks ago. And oh, I have to have a hard conversation with somebody. Okay. So I avoided it. Avoided it. This time only for 6 weeks, right? So that conversation happens and it was still hard, but it was easier because the person said, yeah, I really kind of needed you, a few weeks ago, but I understand that you had a lot going on too, and we worked it out. So that was, we went from that year spiral to that 6-week spiral into a situation that happened this week. And it was that I felt that pattern again. There was a little bit of conflict. And I felt that pattern of, oh, I don't want to go there. I am more comfortable just like, letting it all like move through my body and get calm. And I had a friend that said, my suggestion is that you reach out sooner rather than later to this person. So I reached out. It was a little bit tense, but it has kind of begun to work itself out. So that spiral that went from a year to 6 weeks to 72 hours, right? It was easier to heal when there was only the pain and the conflict for that short period of time. The pain and the conflict is the same. It doesn't feel good when you're in conflict with somebody, especially if you are a conflict avoider like me, right? But it also doesn't feel good to keep avoiding things. And so that is one of my patterns that I'm aware enough about to know, okay, Wendy, these are familiar feelings. How big is this spiral going to be, right? And then the other spiritual principle that, is true about this is that it comes back around until you like figure it out. And then once you've actually like worked through those life lessons enough, it stops spiraling because it's no longer your issue. And so I share that just as my own example. Not everybody listening to this is a conflict avoider. So, but my guess is that everybody here, if you're paying attention to yourself, if you are asking that first question, what do I need? We all have some type of pattern that doesn't feel good, that we avoid or that we continue to repeat. And we keep thinking that if we just either avoid it or just doing the same thing, eventually it will stop. But no, it won't. It's not going to stop until we address it, we work through it, we move through it, we figure out why it keeps coming up in our life, we figure out what we need to stop that pattern, and then we get the help and we make the changes in our lives to bring healing, wholeness, and health to that. And it doesn't matter if we're talking about doing that on a very individual level of, okay, I want to love my body in this way by getting in shape or eating differently or eating better or whatever. And you do it until you don't do it, and then you avoid it, and then you get on that conveyor belt and you get overwhelmed. It happens with relationships. Like I just said, those 3 people in my life, that pattern is going to keep coming around for me over and over and over again until I'm like, okay, I recognize it. I recognize this in my body. I'm going to have this conversation right now. And then it doesn't have to come around. And it's not easy, but it gets easier with practice. And so I think about that also with UUCGV and who we are as a faith community. Last week, and I haven't counted today, but last week we had 78 people here. And we had 20 people on Zoom. And that is the type of numbers we had before COVID. And that's really, really exciting. And that also means that we are going to be coming together, bumping up against each other, interacting with each other, and trying to figure out who we are together. And I can take us back to who we were before COVID, but I don't want to go back to who we were before COVID or who I was before COVID, because I think the last 3 years, we as individuals, we as humanity, we've been fundamentally changed. We as a faith community have been fundamentally changed, and that's exciting and that's fun, and we get to decide who we are now. And this is the beginning of those conversations. And so do not be surprised is as we have more people back in our congregation, back on Sunday mornings, this is our practice to bump up against each other a little bit. We have all different personalities. We have all different Enneagram types. We have every Sunday, we come bringing different needs. We come bringing different skill sets, and we have different levels of being able to ask for, acknowledge, and name what we need from each other. And so sometimes we're going to do it skillfully, and sometimes we're going to do it awkwardly. And sometimes our pain may come out feeling like an attack, and sometimes something that is not an attack may feel like an attack, and sometimes we're like, I did that really well. And each one of us is probably every part of that. And so I invite us just to start thinking about, how are we doing this in our lives? And then more from an organizational level, who are we in the community? Who are we as UUCGV? Who are we in relation to mutual aid and Grand Valley Peace and Justice and all of these other organizations, and our partnership with the library? And I had a really interesting conversation with Jennifer, who is the facility director over at the library, a few months ago. And she said something which was just kind of an aha moment for me. And I may have already shared my aha. I don't know if I've shared this with you or not, but sometimes we can try to be everything to everybody. And when we're trying to be everything to everybody, we can get overwhelmed and we can get on that conveyor belt, and we may be able to like pick a chocolate up here or there. But when all of a sudden we're not only picking up chocolates, we're picking up candy canes, and we're picking up caramels, and we're picking up, I don't know, peanut butter squares or whatever, it can get overwhelming. And what Jennifer said to me, and it was just like, oh, she's like, you just need to figure out who you are and what you're able to do and what you're designed to do and what you want to do. And then you go and do that. And you can't be everything to everybody. And I think that is part of the conversation that I'm hoping that we're going to have in the next month as we start to go into this stewardship season. Who are we? What are the needs in this community? What are the needs in our UUCG amongst ourselves? What are our needs? And then what role do we play within the needs of the larger community? And what can we do in a healthy way? What things can we no longer do in a healthy way? Where has our conveyor belt gotten so busy that we're stumbling and we're throwing chocolate everywhere? And how do we do that? And so that is what I'm really excited about when I look out and into the computer screen and see all of you and out and look at all of you, that it's time for us to figure out who we are post-COVID, post-pandemic. And I do understand we still have COVID here, that COVID is not gone, but we're also here together in a new way. And so we're doing things a little bit differently this year. Usually, and I don't know why we've done it this way in the past, but we have I do a sermon about stewardship, and then we have a kickoff party where we invite you to fill out your pledge card, and then we talk about what the community means to us. We're going to be doing that a little bit differently this year. So I'll do my sermon, but then the next week we have Kevin and Shaylin Watt, who are a couple. They're going to come and they're going to spend the day with us on either March 5th or 6th, whichever day is that Sunday. And Kevin's going to do a sermon about holistic agriculture and holistic health. He's a chaplain at Hope West, but he also understands holistic agriculture. And then his wife is a statistician. And so the two of them are working with us to help us figure out who we are. And so I invite you to kind of keep that date in your head, because it'll be a wonderful sermon. We'll have a potluck together, and then we'll have our cottage meeting led by this wonderful couple. And I don't have to be in charge of it. But I'm excited because it's going to be the opportunity for us to figure out, who are we? What do we stand for? Where are our priorities? And how do we move forward in 2023? And then the following Saturday will be our big party and our cabaret. And then we'll invite everybody to fill out their pledge cards. But it will be after we've really taken the time to come together and figure out who we are as a community, know where we're headed, know which direction we're going. So I really am very excited about that. And it is just about being willing to look at who we are, where we've been. In my chaplaincy class, we do something called clinical pastoral education, and it's how the process you go through if you want to become a professional chaplain. And it's an interfaith, chaplains are interfaith. And a lot of what we talk about in that CPE class is, it's not that you have to, nobody in the class has the same theology. But we talk about theology, we talk about our belief systems, and to go through the certification process to become a professional chaplain, you have to know your theology. You have to write about your theology. You have to be able to express your theology. because you have to be grounded and centered, and your theological roots need to go deep so that you are not being blown over with all of the people you're talking about in your life when you go out as a chaplain. And then good chaplaincy is, a good chaplain is somebody that knows what they believe, knows why they believe it, can stand in that, and then goes out and engages in conversation about with other people, no matter where they're at, about what they believe, about what they need, about what is meaning to them. And if done correctly, that person will never even know what the chaplain believes, because it's not about the chaplain. But the chaplain cannot be present for the person or the patient if they don't know already what they believe. And that concept, I think, applies to us in our individual lives. What do I stand for? What are my values? How do I stand in my truth with my family? That comes from different paradigms. When I go see them for Thanksgiving, does it mean that I need to tell them that they're wrong and what my truth is over and over again? Maybe, but maybe not. Maybe it's just enough to be like, I know where I am. I'm grounded, I'm rooted, I know what I stand for, I know what I believe, I know why I believe it. And now I can engage with this other person who believes otherwise. And if that person who believes otherwise has actually done the inner work to also be grounded and rooted and stable, then you're going to have a really lovely conversation with neither person feeling uprooted or fearful or scared or resentful. And if you're having that conversation with somebody who hasn't done that work, but you have, then you still will be grounded and rooted and stable. And they can be doing whatever it is they're doing, and it's not going to uproot you. And I invite us to think about that on our personal level. What is it that I need to be a healthy human being? Literally a healthy human being. What is it that I need to do to have a healthy family right around me? What is it that I need to do, that we do as a UUCGV community, to say, we're stable, we're grounded, we're planted, this is who we are, this is what we stand for. Where we interact with other organizations, we're here and supportive, and where we don't, it's okay. That happens on so many different levels. And so that's what I invite us to do. And one of the, we had a really wonderful conversation at our aging group a few weeks ago. And one of the areas that I'm hoping that we'll go in personally and as a community is, are we taking the time in our own lives to know what we need as we age? Some of us live alone. Some of us are caring for loved ones. Do we know what our needs are right now? Do we know how to ask for those needs from our neighbors, from our family, from this UUCGV faith community? And then as a community, what are the networking and the support structure that we can start putting together so that nobody feels like they are falling through the cracks or feeling like I can't reach out for help because I don't want to be a burden to anybody? How do we get to the point that, well, so what I want to say is, it makes me sad to think somebody would say, oh, well, I just don't want to be a burden. But in order for somebody to not feel like a burden, we can't have our conveyor belts be doing what Lucy was doing. Because if our conveyor belt is doing that and we're throwing chocolate everywhere, the person that really needs help is going to look at us and say, that person is so overwhelmed, they can't help me right now. And so I don't want to be another piece of chocolate. I don't want to be a burden. I'm not going to ask for help. And in all honesty, if we're on the conveyor belt and we're throwing chocolate everywhere, we kind of can't be a help. And so that is what I'm hoping that we'll do together in the next few months is, okay, what are the needs? Because we have needs here. We need to we have been, but we care for each other. But we also can't effectively care for each other if we have not taken the time to slow down the conveyor belt, to figure what we stand for, how we can help in the most effective way, and how we can all come together so that there's not just two people at any specific conveyor belt. So I hope that makes sense with all of my chocolate analogies today. And like I said, I could go on and on and on because there are so many stories and there's so much need. And yet here we are all together. And as the opening words said, there's almost nothing that we can't do if we do it together. But there's so much that we can't do if we try to do it alone. And I just want to throw those little seeds out for today as we go out into our individual and collective lives. I think that's enough for today, but this is not the last you're going to hear about that. And so let us close now with one of my favorite hymns, 1028 in your teal hymnal, The Fire of Commitment.